já tá vivo logo agora. Você começou não. Eu vou colocar primeiro aqui pra pessoa e depois quando for pra lá eu. Porque senão eu vou ficar muito. Tu acha que é legal colocar assim de baixo?
Mas ele vai ficar tirando porque só tô com esse cabo aí. Se você tiver alguma coisa,
porque eu quero algo que deixe.
Quer que eu faça pra ti?
Vou colocar aqui. Vem pra cá.
Eu achei muito foda, próximo não. Vou ficar na frente das pessoas.
É só pra gravar.
Não, tá baixo. É porque tá no meu pé.
Fica um pouco na lateral. Vou só ajustar aqui, ó.
Só se você atualizar o sinal aqui.
Não tu acha que ela fica aí? Não fica na frente de ninguém.
Vai deixando tudo. Não, vou ficar aqui. Não, aí fica essa primeira. A gente pode botar um volume. Você bota tipo 50, 60% aqui, eu deixo o volume e você controla aí.
And she's sweet and loud for a while.
Até o Uber que eu fui pedir aqui, eu não consegui pedir. Acredita?
Eu acredito também, às vezes
Tem noção da situação que eu não consegui pedir?
Só mandar aqui. Chega um pouco só pra ver o WhatsApp. Só mandar aqui. Transmitir um pouco só pra ver o WhatsApp.
late. It was too late nowadays. Last year at 1 a.m. Yeah. Yeah. It's This is what I want to make. Usually I don't just lecture. I interact.
Tá gravando o que aí, tu?
And we all gonna have lunch here.
1080?
Aqui? Não, ainda não. Vou gravar em 720, eu acho.
E aqui?
Mas essa transição, qualquer coisa fica só no take mesmo. Sem a gente depois precisar de. Como é que tá aí? Tá muito escuro, né?
1080
Qualquer coisa ele vai
30
ficar.
FPS.
Vou separar no meio.
Melhor ter qualidade do que. Depois o pessoal ali na frente nem só pra mim.
Vou sair na transmissão, viu? Vou virar um pouquinho.
Dá pra mim passar hoje.
Não, mas quando a pessoa tá passando ali, ó, não tá travando, tá vendo? Não tá. Na transmissão não, tá vendo? Só que eu gravei ele faz assim. Delay vai acontecer. Eu tô pensando em reduzir. Mas delay vai ter.
Tem que ter.
A transmissão aí.
Não pode ficar.
Pode na hora da transmissão. Eu tô pensando em reduzir pra 1000 FPS. Pra 1000 bitrate. Ele vai fazer um pouco mais rápido. Tá resolvido, tá? Se caso cair, vou botar até aqui na câmera. Vou colocar aqui uma bitrate um pouquinho menor para não ter problema de trabalho quando estiver assistindo. Não, mas aqui tá no. Tem que ver aqui, ó. Tá no final devagar. Tá fluido, tá vendo? Tá melhorado já. Agora ele tá carregando. Já tá um pouco, né? Mas daqui a pouco ele começa a capturar. Então vai ficar tudo em Já tá meio que com essa câmera de...
Vai ficar ali, só faz teste. Isso aí. Tá feito. Começa pronto. É pra colocar um pouco, né? E a gente faz. Certeza. Se a gente fizer, dá certo. Um pouco pra trás e um pouco pra frente. Vai ficar meio...
Você fica uma luz meio na cara. Ah, isso tá melhor. Ah, ainda tá ao vivo aí, que eu
Dá uma clareada.
Quer que eu tire ou que eu...
Vai. Deixar. Dá uma regulada aqui.
Porque eu achei que essa parte ficou com muita sombra, entendeu? E aqui ficou muito claro.
Quer afastar? Se quiser afastar, vai afastar. Fica muito melhor.
Se eu tocar aqui, ó, fica a luz na cabeça, né?
Ó, vou filmar aqui. Dá um pouco pra trás.
A iluminação aqui é uma cena um pouco melhor. Mais escuro.
Se afastar só um pouquinho já daria certo.
Só aqui? Tá bom.
É.
A pessoa vinha pra abre aqui pra ler.
Não faz nada. Tá massa. Que é o que tá falando, né?
Tá perfeito, tá? Aqui a pessoa tá andando e tal. Esse da luz aqui ficou muito pra baixo e aí ele dá um contraste muito automático.
Gera sombra, né?
Aí bem melhor. E aí, o que é que tu acha? Bota mais atrás?
Mas eu
Porque
acho
existe um compensação, deve ter a compensação automática. Aí de contraste, tá vendo? Quando a pessoa tá abaixo da luz, dá um contraste. Mas aí eu não tô com problema. São mínimo, né? Pra saber se a gente tá online, eu vou voltar pra gente.
passou não aqui.
Foi eu atrás dele, tá lá. Foi eu. Só pra saber se tá lá. Eu vou só no banheiro. Vou deixar. E o áudio, né? Vou deixar o áudio.
Oi. Okay. Come here.
Isso.
Acho que eu vou sair pra procurar. E pra gravar, tem algumas, mas eu acho que estavam perto de descarregar e não sabe. Acho que eu boto, sabe? Vai.
Vou precisar botar agora, porque vai começar já.
Tá.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hugo. I'm the managing partner for BEI, Bilingual Education Institute. And it's with a great joy and a lot of happiness that we are starting the first workshop, Approaches and Practices in Bilingual Education. I'd like to welcome all of you to our event and say that I hope that you enjoy your time here. First, I'd like to thank our speakers for being here with us, as occupied as they are, to open a time slot on their schedule and give us the opportunity to listen and learn from them. It's just great. Thank you very much. This event is organized by BEI, the Bilingual Education Institute, a company that rises from the challenge offered by bilingual education. Today, we are here with a goal: to learn, to listen, to discuss about bilingual education. But why bilingual education? And most importantly, why now? Bilingual education is a reality more and more present in our lives, not only as teachers and educators, but as people. But we will not discuss about the benefits of it in our world, the advantages of a second language, etc. That is not. Our purpose is to go beyond that. Our event was planned and conceived aiming a real and deep discussion about bilingual education. What is it? What is it about? What can it offer to our students? Is it only about learning another language, or can it offer more than that? Bilingual education is a reality in the life of many students, not only here in Brazil, but worldwide, and not a recent one. But for us, it has become a recent trend, almost like an innovation. All of a sudden, every school wants to be bilingual. That sounds great, but is it true? Does everything that is being offered is bilingual education? Or is it just a novelty? A marketing scheme to attract more and more students? But most importantly, is this all that bilingual education can be? From this challenge, rose a company that aimed to give answers to all of those questions. BEI, the Bilingual Education Institute, is a company that is focused on the needs of the schools. With educational consultants specialized in bilingual education, the Bilingual Education Institute seeks to provide Brazilian schools with strategies to implement a true and of quality bilingual education while maintaining their pedagogical identity. But it's not only that. The Bilingual Educational Institute sees and understands the importance of teachers and educators in this process. And because of that, we decided to start with this workshop with answers to what we believe are very important questions regarding the pedagogical practice inside a classroom. we'll start our morning with Mr. Carlos Trindade, a specialist by Instituto Singularidades in Bilingual Didactics. Mr. Carlos is going to bring us the pedagogical approaches in bilingualism education, an introductory but very important topic that is going to lend and guide us through our discussion in bilingual education. After lunch this afternoon, we're going to have the opportunity to hear and talk with two very special people, two teachers who are inserted in the everyday reality of bilingual schools. We'll begin with Ms. Susan Clementia, heading our second talk, which is brought to us by Stanford. Susan is the pedagogical coordinator in Escola Internacional, a bilingual school, and we'll be talking about developing a bilingual curriculum. You can do it. After a little break, we'll continue with Ms. Chris Meany. Chris has a master's degree in applied linguistics by PUC and is the coordinator of Stanford School, a school with more than 20 years in practicing teaching bilingual education. And with her, we'll talk about the materials, more important, on the bilingual language materials connecting the school to the world. Our next day, we will also have amazing talks. We'll be starting with Dr. Fabio Delano. Fabio has a PhD in linguistics, is the pedagogical supervisor at 7 de Setembro School, and is a pioneer in bilingual education here in Ceará, with more than 20 years of experience in teaching English. Dr. Fabio is going to bring us a very important topic when we think about bilingualism in our schools, school identity and bilingualism, a critical approach. At last, but not least, Ms. Kelly Tavares is going to finish brilliantly our workshop. Ms. Kelly is the country head of Cambridge Assessment in English here in Brazil, and a very important partner for the Bilingual Education Institute, and is going to talk about the Cambridge examinations, a tool for teachers and students' development. With these 5 talks, we believe we have covered some of the main doubts and questions that arise when we speak about bilingual education, but far from extinguishing the subject. This is our first workshop and a launching event for the Bilingual Education Institute, but it won't be our last. We want to take these talks to other cities, to other regions, because we at the Bilingual Education Institute believe in the bilingual education. We believe that it can be more than it appears, or more than it has shown to us until now. We believe that it can be a true change in the lives of our students, and we believe that we can be a part of that change. Thank you very much, and enjoy our events. And for our first talk, I'd like to invite Mr. Carlos Henrique Trindade. He has been in the ELT world for over 20 years, and throughout this time has worked in some of the main international publishers. Carlos is a specialist in bilingual education and has been implementing bilingual educational programs in schools all over Brazil for the past 5 years. Carlos is currently the leader of Santillanes Group's newest initiative, Educate Bilingual Program. Welcome, Carlos.
Good morning, people.
Good morning.
How are you? This is a very challenging talk because I have a lot of competition. I have the sun, I have the beach, and I have a swimming pool right next to us. You know, so it's going to be very well. The good thing is that I'm going to be the first one, so you still have energy, right? But also I have a challenge to keep up the energy to the other speakers, right? So it's a pleasure being here to talk to you a little bit about bilingual education, bilingualism, some of the concepts that are key to this endeavor into the bilingual education world and education for the 21st century. It's going to be, as Hugo said, it's going to be a very introductory talk. is going to prepare the grounds for the other speakers. I hope I don't give any spoilers to your talks. I hope not, you know. But I think it's interesting because we're going to be talking about some concepts that are key for us to perform in this new perspective of bilingual education and be sure that we're actually performing bilingual education and not something else, you know. Is the presentation ready? It's going to be more of a talk. It's going to be a discussion, so it's going to be very interactive. I'm going to be asking you questions. I want you to come up with answers, and we're going to be discussing your answers, right? And so that we can get out of here today with an idea, or at least with the principles that guide this bilingual education teaching and learning, right? Let's just wait for the presentation to show up, but so that I can show you the agenda. Is it working? I'm still looking for it. So we're going to be talking about bilingual education and bilingualism. What is the difference? Sometimes we tend to talk about bilingualism and bilingual education as the same thing, and they're not. Also, we're going to be talking about the differences between international schools and bilingual schools. There is also a common confusion. Susan is here, can help us with that, and also Chris. We're going to be talking also about bilingual education programs. That is new, that is something that is coming, and it's very important for us to know exactly what is the difference between those things of having a bilingual education program, being in a bilingual school, being in an international school, bilingualism, bilingual education. And then we're going to be talking about CLIL and bilingual education. What is exactly CLIL? Is it the same as bilingual education or not? Is it a type of bilingual education? We're going to be discussing that. We're also going to be talking about the planning and the assessment. No spoilers, I promise. But I have to talk about that, you know, because it's all interconnected. So there's no way I can avoid talking about that. And that will be our program for the next 2 hours. Hopefully we can get the presentation so you can have a visual aid. If not, there's no problem. I can talk from here and take a quick look at the slides. The first thing that we're gonna be talking about is bilingual education and bilingualism. So what we're gonna be doing here, you're gonna be talking to people around you. Okay, so like maybe in groups of 4, or ideally groups of 4. So you can get together in groups of 4 or 3. Tell me or discuss with your partners what is bilingualism and what is bilingual education. Okay? So I'll give you like 5 minutes for you to discuss that and come up with a concept. What is bilingual education? What is bilingualism? All right?
Seria melhor se
você ali.
Você tem que sair da apresentação para que o computador consiga reconhecer o projetor. Senão ele não consegue.
Não tem problema.
Cadê o F? Ele ainda tá aqui? Tá lá.
Sai da apresentação.
Sair da apresentação.
Tirar ele. Sem sair da apresentação.
Ele só reiniciar o computador já pega. Vem você trocar o conectado.
Tá, a bateria, se você trocar logo, a hora é agora.
Você é mais de fora, somente pega.
Não tira de uma vez, senão desliga.
Eu parei de gravar. Preciso ir com ele que ele sabe pra cá.
Esse aqui é o seu canal.
Esse é o meu, é.
Pode. Tirar?
Nem identifica, ó. Nem identifica.
Não tá prestando essa.
Se tivesse como. Vou olhar aqui no evento. Acho que isso é pra.
Hi guys. Hey.
Tudo pra gravar mesmo, tá dois cliques.
Tem 2 cliques. Tá contando.
É.
Se eu der o clique de novo, ele. Vou dar quantos cliques quiser, só não pausa. Legal era assim.
conseguisse baixar era a iluminação, né?
Se acha importante pegar isso, é melhor pegar o slide no meio.
Oi?
Não, mas tinha que estar sendo ao vivo.
Okay. You guys ready to start our discussion? What do you think? Let's start with bilingualism. What is bilingualism? Anyone would like to share? You look like you want to share.
In our discussion, we don't really know, but we thought that could be like the process of actually learning in the course of your life, not just in school, but that could be in studying abroad or traveling or through cultural experiences. And we were talking about bilingualism.
Bilingualism.
Okay, so that's what we thought that could be like the process of learning a new language in the course of your life, but through different experiences.
Who else? Who else would like to share the ideas? Okay, there's no right or wrong. We're just trying to build a concept here.
Okay, so in our discussion, we're a bit confused about what exactly we're expecting from the idea of bilingualism, but we have here several different opinions as a group, obviously. So we have the idea that bilingualism might be more related, for example, to the idea of an international school where there's a full immersion in the language, where everyone actually speaks English, there's no reserved space for English, but there might be the possibility of expecting more of a concept idea, where I would refer a bit to what my translation says from Schleiermacher, and the idea of bilingual being only the person who was born and raised speaking two languages. So, for example, in a bilingual family where you have an American father and a Brazilian mother, for example, and you will be forced since a very young age to understand both languages, and through that they will be completely bilingual and not learning as an adult, which is something completely different than being actually bilingual. So that's where we went on. And in terms of bilingual education, we were more... Not yet, okay.
Your name is Lulu, okay. Who else? Anyone else would like to add to this? No? Do you want to talk? Come on.
Bilingual, well, it's not only about learning, it's about having not only English as a second language, but any other language. It could be like learning the signs, or in Brazil, if you are an Indian and you learn Portuguese, so you are a bilingual person. So I think that that's the idea of it.
Okay.
Speaking two languages as both native languages.
Right. Anyone else? You're becoming to relax a little bit and dare to talk. That's good. That's good. We need that. Okay. Let's talk about bilingualism first, and then we'll go back to bilingual education. Okay. We're going to be talking general terms, okay? There are lots of concepts about bilingualism. Some of them you've mentioned, is the ability to speak two languages, is the ability... There are many concepts that try to define what bilingualism is. But the common confusion is exactly that. Bilingualism is the process or is the end? Bilingualism is the state or is the path? Bilingualism is the path, is the state. Okay, so it's where we want to get at. We want to educate students so that they become bilingual citizens, so that they reach a level of bilingualism. Okay, so bilingualism is the ultimate goal. And bilingualism today is much more than just mastering the code. In the past, in the 20th century, being bilingual would mean to master 2 different codes. And they could be English, it could be an indigenous language, a native language, it could be a sign language, any other language, but just mastering the code itself, not taking into account the cultural aspects and the social aspects that are embedded in the language. Language is culture. There's no way you can separate that. So today we recognize that bilingualism, for us to have a level of bilingualism, and there are different levels of bilingualism, but for us to reach a level of bilingualism, we have to take into account the ability to function into or more cultures, to be able to understand the subtleties of different cultures and the contexts around the language itself. A lot of you have heard probably that, you know, the American and the British jokes are not funny. You know, why they're not funny? They're not funny because we don't understand the cultural context in which they're in. They are. Once you understand that, it's hilarious. It's really funny. You know, and that's why it's very difficult sometimes to. I have 3 kids. Okay. They're not, 2 of them are not kids really anymore. They're 18 and 16. One of them is actually, you know, experiencing learning English through Netflix, through video games and all that. And he mentioned, yesterday he mentioned to me that it's funny because there's some expressions that are translated and make no sense. You know? He was watching a cartoon and there was something, a joke about grounded, the term grounded. You're grounded. But it wasn't grounded. It was grounded because you had to be on the ground. But if you try to translate that, it makes no sense, you know? So that's that, you know? It's not just knowing to use the language, it's also knowing how the culture around, or the cultures around that language work as well. And for English, there are many different cultures that work, that influence the language, right? Not just American, not just British, but many other languages. And even now we know that our language influences, Portuguese influences English, and all languages influence each other. So that's what we have to take into account. Okay, what about, go back to that slide there. What about bilingual education? So we know that bilingualism is what we want to reach. We want to reach bilingualism, a level of bilingualism. And what is bilingual education then? What have you found out?
I think that given that bilingualism is the ultimate goal and it can only exist if you can function in different cultures, I think that bilingual education would be to acquire those cultures in their native language.
Okay, what do you think? Who else wants to share the ideas, opinion? You want to.
Well, I think it's the ability to use another language. You know, it's like when we teach, for example, the kids in more than one language, and it's not only about speech, it's about reading and writing. So the bilingual education can be, we can teach it in different levels for different purposes, and then using culture and all
the background of the things around. It's more than only classroom or board, than something like that.
Okay, you're getting there. You're getting there. Anyone else like to share ideas? Don't be shy. See what you think. So we know that bilingualism is the ultimate goal. We want to get there, right? What is bilingual education?
It would be like teaching kids the language that you want them to learn, not teach them the language itself.
All right, we're getting there, right? We're getting there. Anyone else? You want something? Okay.
Oh, I guess bilingual education has to do with the path. I'd say if bilingualism is the ultimate goal, bilingual education would stand for the path, for the process.
You got the clue, huh? I gave you that clue.
I was going to say the same, but it would be exposing the person. I think it's one of the paths, and exposing the person who wants to be bilingual to two languages and two cultures in the most natural way, so he can acquire both languages naturally.
Okay. Yeah, bilingualism, so bilingualism is the ultimate goal. There are types of bilingualism too. According to Ophelia Garcia, there are 4 types of bilingualism. We won't have time to go in depth into those, but just so you know that historically we have had an evolution on the way that we conceive bilingualism. Right? And in the beginning, bilingualism, and not just in the beginning, right now, this is happening too, okay? So we have those 4 types of bilingualism happening right now. Subtractive bilingualism, think of the Hispanic community in the United States, okay? The Mexicans that go there, they want to learn English. Then there are schools that offer bilingual education programs, and they are immersed in that environment that speaks English all the time, has English all the time. Their language is not very much valued there, you know. Spanish for Americans, especially now with Mr. Trump, Spanish is, well, why? Why do I need Spanish if I speak English, you know? So what happens to this individual is that he or she goes to a school, they go to school, they start learning English, and they feel empowered by learning the language of the majority. And they are discriminated by their language, their minority language. It's not valued, it's not important. So if they don't speak the language at home, or if they don't try and maintain the language, this bilingualism will lead to a monolingualism of the second language. They will forget Spanish over time. Because they don't practice, they don't speak the language anymore, they don't see the importance of that, they will lose it. So subtractive is something like that. You know, you learn a second language only to forget the first one. And that's not a very good side effect for bilingualism. That's not the goal, really. You don't want them to forget their mother tongue, their first language, once they learn the second language, because it's just a replacement. You know, it's not adding another language, adding another knowledge. But that happens a lot, especially in the United States, but in other places as well. Additive is more like, you know, well, okay, I learned this language, but I'll keep mine, you know. I will have some instruments, some tools that will help me in the process of learning to maintain my first language. I will not forget, it will not be forbidden to talk in my home language. So you'll be able to keep it. Your language is not, it is more valued than with the subtractive. The subtractive is not important. In the additive, well, you keep your language. You're going to learn another one, but keep your language, right? So the procedures involved, the tools for teaching in an additive environment, surrounded by tools and practices and strategies to recover their mother language. So the mother language, the first language is valued, and the learning of the second language is used also for them to recover their first language. When the first language is being forgotten, they use the English to actually go back there and try and give the right value to that language, put that first language in the right place, for the society to accept that language. The language was there, but it was being forgotten. So, okay, I learned English, and by learning English, I also learned that my first language is important. So I have to bring it back to society, to social habits, to cultural habits, and put that in the right place. With additive, you don't do that. You just maintain the language, but not necessarily you have this work of putting the first language in situations where it is valued, in situations where it is really necessary or really important. Okay? And dynamic bilingualism is the one that is a concept that assumes that all languages interfere with each other. They influence each other. Once you learn a second language, your Portuguese will not be the same. And once you learn a third language, your English and your Spanish and your Portuguese will be different. And it will be your own language. I don't speak American English, or I don't speak British English. I speak Carlos's English. That has an influence from my Portuguese, from the time that I lived in the States, from the time that I worked for British companies. I make my own selections of words. I make my own construction of sentences. And so it's like it's something fluid, it's liquid. Once you learn another language, it's inevitable. You're going to be influencing that language, and that language is going to be influencing your language. Question?
Is Spanglish an example of that?
Very good. We're going to be talking about that. It has to do with that. It has to do with the concept of dynamic bilingualism. Yeah, Portuñol too. It has to do with that, but there's a different name for this process, for what happens with that. That's within the concept of dynamic bilingualism, but it's a different name. Okay, but I'll come back to that. So bilingual education is the means, okay? When we talk about, okay, we want to be bilingual, we want to reach bilingualism, what do I do to get there? That's bilingual education, right? Needs to be coherent to the goal to be achieved. So if we have a concept of bilingualism that takes into account the fact that language is culture, bilingual education has to take into account that language is culture. You cannot teach just language if you want to reach bilingualism. Okay? Once conceptually coherent, it can be implemented in a variety of ways. There's not one single recipe for bilingual education, a step-by-step path that you can follow and you reach bilingualism. No, there are many different ways of reaching it. There are ways not to reach it, so you have to be aware of that as well. And it will really depend to social, cultural, linguistic context that we're in. Okay, so bilingual education that happens in the States is going to be different than bilingual education that happens in Canada, that will be different than the one that happens in Europe, and will be different than the one that happens in South America and in the different countries of South America. And even in some regions in Brazil, we might have different types of bilingual education with the same key concepts, because you have to keep the key concepts, but different ways and structures. So bilingual education is that, is the strategy, is the path, okay, to reach bilingualism, okay? What about bilingual schools and international schools? What is the difference between bilingual schools and international schools? 5 minutes for you to discuss that with your group, with the colleague next to you, okay? I want you to come up with a difference. What is the difference between an international school and a bilingual school? You don't talk, okay? Just, yeah.
É por causa do Wi-Fi, cara. Aí ele, como ele é analógico ainda, né, digital, ele fica cruzando o sinal.
Deu certo, valeu.
Deu, né? Encontrou, né? Qualquer coisa tem mais dois.
Alright,
Tem
guys.
farmácia aí do lado.
Now,
Vai no intervalo eu vou comprar.
if you want to talk, just raise your hand. Now I have an assistant here that will help me. So it's not going to be just me running around the place, but I can be as well helping. Just raise your hand and tell us what do you think is the difference between a bilingual school and an international school. Again, don't be ashamed of giving a wrong answer. That's not a wrong answer. We're trying to build a concept here.
I guess the main difference is that bilingual international schools, there are bilingual schools with an international curriculum. They have to follow an international curriculum. And a bilingual school doesn't have to do that. So it just needs to teach both languages. And there are many paths for that, as you said. So I guess that's the main difference. For example, international school, you would have a degree from the United States as well. and then you would have to follow their MEC as well. Yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. Who else?
Is it work? Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry. And I also think that international school, the goal is not here in Brazil we have some international schools. They have American, how you said, curriculum, and the Portuguese is given as a subject. It's not that they learn many subjects through English and Portuguese. They have Portuguese classes, so it's the other way around, like what we have. Our curriculum, we have many subjects, and English is one of them. And in a bilingual school, we are going to have the curriculum given into 2 languages.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else would like to add or share the views? No? Okay. Let's first talk about the international schools, okay? International schools have an international curriculum. It could be Cambridge, could be IB, could be fieldwork education, which is a brand new that I just saw these days in one school in Salvador, and there might be others, right? But in fact, what happens is that they have an international curriculum. Sometimes they even have a different school calendar. Some schools work with the Northern Hemisphere calendar. They start in August or September and finish the classes in May, June, okay? And what you were saying, Michelle was saying something that is very important. International schools are more like a second language monolingual school. Exactly what she said, you know. You have a curriculum in the second language, and then you have Portuguese as a subject, okay? That is pretty much what happens with schools like, you know, International School Curitiba, Suíço Brasileiro, Corcovado. I don't know if here in Fortaleza you have an international school. You do? High school, yeah? Only for high school? Those are high school programs. They're a bit different, yeah. They're a bit different, yeah, than that. They're more like bilingual education programs for high school. Then, okay. Maple Bear, yeah, Maple Bear is an intriguing case. Yeah, supposedly they use the Canadian curriculum, but they adapted it to Brazilian reality, so it's more like a bilingual school than an international school, really, you know. But it has as a main guideline the Canadian curriculum. They follow the Canadian curriculum. Okay, so this is those are international schools. And then the bilingual schools, well, bilingual schools, has been a lot of discussion about that in Brazil. Because there's no national law defining what a bilingual school is in Brazil, okay? And that leaves room for a lot of misinterpretation about what a bilingual school really is, okay? There's some local initiatives in Rio, I think in Santa Catarina, there's some states and cities that are trying to make a law, trying to define what bilingual school is. I think we're still it's still a too early stage for us to actually define what a bilingual education or a bilingual school is in Brazil at the moment, unless we take as a parameter what happens in other countries. And if we take as a parameter what happens in other countries, that's what roughly we have as an idea. So from international standards and some studies, they must have at least 40% of the whole curriculum taught in the second language. From 40, 50, 50, 40, 60, something like that. And they could use a mirrored or a complementary curriculum. Some schools, whatever they do in Portuguese, they do in English or in any other language, okay? Some schools choose some subjects and they teach those subjects just in the second language, okay? And the others in the first language. So those are the two types of schools that we could consider as bilingual schools from what we see outside of Brazil, not from here, because here we don't have a law that tells us exactly what is a bilingual school. So there are lots of schools that tell that they are bilingual. They're actually not really bilingual. They have a different type of English that could be what we call a bilingual education program. Could be. Sometimes it's not even that. All right? Bilingual education programs, if a school has at least 10% of the whole curriculum taught in the second language, the school is entitled to have a bilingual education program. The school is able to produce enough work to have a bilingual education program. Because what's different here is the process, is the strategy that you use. Bilingual education in the 21st century is not really 100% dependent on the number of hours taught. If you have more hours taught, you can reach a higher level of bilingualism. It will speed up the process. But if you have a large number of hours teaching language for language, you're teaching just the language as goal, your level of bilingualism that you're going to reach is going to be very low. Okay? So it really matters. What matters the most is what you do with those hours of instruction. So that's what I'm saying here. The 10% of the whole curriculum must expose students to a second language according to the principles that guide bilingual education and bilingualism. Cannot be EFL. Cannot teach present simple, present perfect as a goal, as an ultimate goal. Focus on grammar, focus on language structures, and say that you have a bilingual education program. That's not bilingual education. That's a part of bilingual education. Language learning is important too, but is a part of bilingual education. And a school with a bilingual, this is very important, a school with a bilingual education program is not necessarily a bilingual school. I work for a bilingual education program. And I keep telling the schools that we're not turning them into bilingual schools. They're not bilingual schools. You are a school, oh, I can tell now that I am a bilingual school. No. You are a school that has a bilingual education program. That you can say. But don't say that you're a bilingual school. Okay? So, any questions so far? So we've seen bilingualism, we've seen bilingual education. Briefly, we saw the types of bilingualism that are there, and we saw the difference between international schools and bilingual schools. So far, so good? You have a question.
So there's a guide for bilingual education, and where is this guide?
There are principles that guide bilingual education. There are many authors that are studying that, and that they have books that you can refer to. Ofelia Garcia is one of my favorites. She has written a book called Bilingual Education in the 21st Century that brings the history of bilingual education, some political aspects of it, some sociological aspects of it, and gives good definitions of types of bilingualism and bilingual education. So it's a good source. But there are others as well. Okay? There's not, no, it's not a set of steady rules, okay? There are some concepts. The main concept is that language is the medium of instruction, and you learn something else through English or through another language. An additional language could be Spanish, any other language. Okay, this is one of the most important concepts here, and that changes a lot of other things that we do in our classrooms. And it changes the materials, and it changes a lot of things. It changes the assessment. It changes a great deal of things. But I will go through some of that in the next slides. CLIL and bilingual education. Okay. Do you know the term CLIL?
Yeah.
What does CLIL stand for? Content and Language Integrated Learning. Okay. Why is it different, or is it different than bilingual education? What is the difference between bilingual education and CLIL? CLIL is an approach. CLIL is an approach, and bilingual education?
I'm not sure, but CLIL is content and language integrated learning. So I'm teaching the content, but also the language. And bilingual education doesn't mean I'm teaching any language, but all subjects through English or any other.
That's a different discussion.
I don't know.
No. It's a good topic. Good topic to discuss. Anyone else? Well, let's talk about the term CLIL. The term CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning, was coined in 1994 by a team of experts led by Dr. David Marsh in Europe. The context of that is European community have just started, and there were many different countries trying to work together, but many different languages, and it was a mess. Okay, they had to organize language learning for those countries so that they could have a good plan or a good standard for the countries to learn other languages, to learn each other's languages, right? So they got together, they founded the Council of Europe, and the Council of Europe, one of the duties of this Council of Europe was to actually organize that language learning for the European community. They created then the Common European Framework of Reference that we usually see that in English, but that's for any language. That's for Portuguese, that's for Spanish, that's for Russian. Common European Framework works for any language. And today is like widespread, you know, it's like the standard for us in terms of levels of proficiency and all that. And CLIL was defined as a strategy for learning the language or for teaching the language within Europe, within the community. For David Marsh, it is a synonym for bilingual education. He talks about CLIL as if it was the same as bilingual education. Okay, so in his books and all that, it's the same. Why? Well, then Ofelia Garcia says that CLIL is a type of bilingual education. She puts bilingual education as a big umbrella, and under this umbrella there's CLIL and there are many other types. David Marsh, no, he says, oh, CLIL, bilingual education is the same thing, and he puts CLIL as the big umbrella and many different ways of promoting CLIL under this big umbrella. According to Ofelia Garcia, the term CLIL was also coined because the term bilingual education or bilingualism was a bit, was not very popular, let's say, in Europe those times. There were some implications, there was some situation similar to the ones in the United States of subtractive bilingualism. So it was not it would not be well received if they would use bilingual education. So they created this acronym, CLIL, and they started working bilingual education through CLIL. So David Marsh sees CLIL as a synonym of bilingual education. Ofelia Garcia sees it as a type of bilingual education. You make a choice. I respect both. I would prefer Ofelia Garcia's view because I think there are other ways of bilingual education, not necessarily CLIL. But CLIL is very powerful, and I think it's a good way for us to start with bilingual education. And it has become the most widely used approach to bilingual education from Europe to Asia. But in the United States, they don't use the term CLIL that much. It's starting to come there, but they use a lot of immersion. They talk a lot about immersion, about sheltered learning, sheltered language learning, because you know the Americans, right? It comes from Europe, so they're doing the same, but they're not using the same acronym and the same. There is one researcher from Maine called Elaine Gallagher. She has been studying CLIL for a long time because she lived in Texas and she worked with the Spanish, the Mexican community. She's been doing that for a long time, and she's starting to spread out this term CLIL in the States. So it's still something that's beginning to be used there in terms of name, you know, because in terms of strategies, they're doing lots of things related to CLIL. Elaine Gallagher. Then we're going to be talking a little bit about some concepts around CLIL and bilingual education. Again, it's going to be an overview, okay? And there's a lot more to talk. And I won't have enough time to go in depth into any of those, but it's important for us to know what the principles are. You were asking, Savannah was asking about, is there a guide? Well, there are many guides that together bring this concept of bilingual education. A very important name is Stephen Krashen. Stephen Krashen talks about acquisition, the language acquisition. And there are some concepts in his studies that are very important to bilingual education. The concept of acquisition versus learning. This is very important. He says that acquisition, you acquire language subconsciously by being exposed to the language. Okay, so you're overexposed to language, and you start making sense of things, but it's subconscious. You're not really conscious of your learning. And it's interesting because when you talk to kids that are in bilingual schools, for instance, and the parents sometimes get very frustrated because the kids get home and the parents ask, "What did you learn today?" And the kid said, "Nothing." Or, "I don't know." Because they're not aware of what they're acquiring actually. They are acquiring, but they're going to be applying that in real situations in the class. It's difficult for them to actually say what they're learning because that's subconscious. So, Stephen Krashen says that first you acquire the language. First you have to be exposed to this, exposed to language, and acquire it subconsciously, get some grounds. For then you you go to the learning itself. And the learning is learning language structures, is learning the grammar itself. But not the grammar, knowing the names of the structures and all that. No, know how language works, how language functions. So first you acquire language, you start producing, sometimes with mistakes, most of the times with mistakes in the beginning, and then once you have enough background, enough knowledge, enough ground in terms of the language, you start learning and you start making sense and knowing that there are patterns of the language for different situations, for different contexts. And then what happens is that once you have acquired the language and you start learning the language, you will work as a self-monitor. Inside your brain, you're going to monitor your own talking. You're going to be speaking. You get the fluency by acquiring the language. If you teach the language, if you teach grammar before the acquisition, they don't have enough language to produce. And so learning and production is limited. Once you acquire the language, you're exposed to a lot of language, and then you start knowing and making sense of how it is organized, then yourself, you're going to speak and you're going to think of the structures, of the models, of the patterns of the language, and you're going to correct yourself. He says that there are three types of monitors. There's the users of the language, there's the under-user of the monitor model, is the person that speaks regardless of the fact it's wrong or not, doesn't care. The person speaks and makes mistakes but keeps speaking. So he doesn't use the knowledge of the language enough to actually correct himself. There's the overuser, and the overuser is the one that tries to talk and keeps correcting himself all the time. And then you don't have the fluency. You don't get the fluency because you start talking and you're insecure and then you correct and then you go back and you start again and you stop. So the idea is that you become an optimal user so that you can make mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes here talking to you, but you correct the main ones, the ones that could prevent the audience to understand what you're saying, right? So the key is intelligibility. You have to be intelligible, right? Silent period, that's another important thing because the kids, when they start learning, when they start acquiring the language, for a while, sometimes for a long time, they don't say a word. They get quiet. They just, listen to it. But you see that they understand because when you give them some commands, they react to the commands, but they don't produce any language. That's the moment where they're making sense of things, They're trying to understand. They know what you're talking about, but they're not sure, they're not ready enough to start producing. You have to respect this. And this silent period is different for each one of us. It could be longer for ones, shorter for others. But once they feel confident enough to produce, they will start producing and they will not stop. Right? But it's important to know that this happens and also to talk to parents. The connection to parents in bilingual education is very important because parents must understand this process, must understand how it works, right? And it's okay for kids to not just say a word for some time, maybe months, as long as you can see that they are reacting to your commands, they're reacting to the language that you're speaking to them. Right? And the affective filter is also very important. Affective filter is an idea. Affective filter for question is an imaginary barrier that when the affective filter is up, it blocks input, so students don't learn. And when is it up? It's up when students don't feel confident enough to make mistakes. When you correct them too much, they don't feel confident enough to risk themselves and produce. They don't feel comfortable because their colleagues are going to make fun of them. So it is crucial to have a comfortable environment, an environment where people can help each other, where the teacher is not the one who is also correcting them, but is guiding them to find out about their mistakes, because we learn by making mistakes, right? So it's very important that we can lower the affective filter so that students are confident enough to risk, to make mistakes, and to produce. Because if you don't do that, they will not learn. And from Ofelia Garcia, there are two concepts here that are very, very interesting. The first one is code switching. We code switch all the time. We teachers of English code switch all the time. We're talking in Portuguese, and then there's one expression that we use in English. We're talking English, and then sometimes there's one expression that we plug in Portuguese. That's code switching. You switch the codes all the time. Kids do that. It's amazing, but kids do that. They start producing in the second language, and whenever they don't know a word, they plug in Portuguese. Okay? So this is the code switching, and this is good. This is not bad. Because in the past, some people would say, no, this is not good. They're going to mix the two languages. It's not going to be positive for them. No, this is part of the process. And it's actually an advance, because if they can plug in the right word, the right class of the word into a sentence switch, they already know the structure. They just don't know the word, you know? And they use the word in Portuguese so that they can communicate. Translanguaging, example of translanguaging is Spanglish, is Portuñol. They're usually not well seen by society, by community. But that's an example of the dynamic bilingualism. Translanguaging is the bilingual practices of bilingual families. I am making an experiment. I don't like to say that, but well, I'm making an experiment with my youngest son. He's 3 years old, and I speak English to him since he was 1. So it's been 2 years. I just speak English to him. It's that one parent, one language technique. And it's even not fair, you know, even one parent, one language, but I get to travel a lot. He stays at school. It's not a bilingual school. It's not an international school. It doesn't have a lot of input in English, only when I am home. So sometimes at night, on the weekends and all that. So it's not a very consistent exposure to the language. But I'll tell you, right now, he understands everything I say. Every single command. When I talk to him, when I ask him to do things, he understands everything. He's starting to produce some things, but he's making his choices. Sometimes he prefers coconut water. He prefers to say coconut water than água de coco. He say, "Papai, eu quero coconut water." But what I'm saying is, well, for me it was very difficult in the beginning because I didn't know the baby talk. You know the baby talk? I didn't know that, you know. So what would I do? So I started to relax and I said, okay, well, those things I will do in Portuguese. Gostoso do papai in Portuguese. But all the rest in English. And it's funny, he reacts, he doesn't have any reaction like, you know, oh, why are you speaking this language to me, or why are you speaking different? No. Sometimes he tries to teach me Portuguese. Because I think it was one, Relâmpago McQueen. He was saying, Relâmpago McQueen, Relâmpago McQueen. I said, oh, Lightning McQueen. He said, não, papai, Relâmpago McQueen. Fala, Relâmpago McQueen. I don't teach him, I just expose him to language, so he's acquiring the language. But what I wanted to say is that, well, what is translanguaging? For example, I tell him, oh, do you like cookies? And he said, eu like. Eu like. Translanguage sometimes creates a different language, could create a different language, but is an example of how the languages influence themselves. They're not in boxes. You learn the English, you'll just, English will be, will not be affected by the other language. No. So that's why we speak our own Englishes. Each one of you has a different English and a different Portuguese as well. I say ba and you say oxente, right? Oxi. Yeah. Ave Maria. And I say ba, che, pri, capaz. But translanguage is that, she has, Ofelia Garcia has a lot of studies in translanguaging, and she states that, Portuñol and Spanglish, she talks about Spanglish specifically, it's not viewed as something good, it's viewed as something negative, but she says, well, but they can communicate. They can pass the message, and isn't that the most important thing after all, Well, to be discussed. Of course, there are a lot of us that are purists that we like to believe that, oh no, I'll speak English just as a native or something like that. It's okay, it's fine. But it's good to know that there are different studies, there are different points of view these days about that. There are other concepts that are increasingly being used with bilingual education. Because bilingual education deals with other types of knowledge, not just linguistic knowledge, it expands to education as a whole. It's not just language learning, it's education. It's a type of education, right? So it can benefit from other concepts that are today in educational agenda, right? Blended learning is one of them, okay? The digitalization of schools is a process, is happening right now, and is inevitable, right? Some schools are more digitalized, others are less digitalized, but they're all becoming digital. And blended learning deals with that, I have digital objects, digital learning objects that could help my kids learn better, so I will use them whenever I feel it's positive, and I blend with concrete materials, with experiences. Experiential learning by doing, that's already proved, If I keep talking to you like that, you'll remember 10% of what I said in 2 weeks. Right? If you don't go for it, if you don't look for books to read or something, it will go away. But if I got you involved in looking for the answers, we didn't have time for that. We needed a whole day for that. But if I involved you in looking for the concepts, in researching in the books and all that, I am sure that you would not forget that. For a long time, you'll keep that. And that's what we try to do. We try to make them do things so that they can learn and retain that knowledge. 21st century skills, that's very important. That's something that is trendy these days. It's much more than just learning a subject. It's learning how to use the knowledge that you acquire at school and make combinations of the knowledges so that you can be ready for different situations at different times, for the unexpected, for the unpredictable, right? We need to prepare students for the unpredictable, because in 30 years, half of the occupations that we have today might be extinct. So how can we prepare them for something that we don't even know? The 21st century skills try to prepare them for that. and inquiry. Traditionally, teachers give the answers, right? We have to switch that. Teachers need to ask the right questions, and students need to find the answers. Students are curious, students want to know, but you have to guide them to look for the answers. Okay, some spoiler, probably. But I'll just go through that very quickly because I'm running out of time. For curriculum design, there's one very popular framework for designing curriculum lessons for bilingual education in CLIL. That is from Doe Coyle. She's also from the group of David Marsh. She works with David Marsh. And she designed this framework that talks about the 4 C's for planning curriculum. So you need to take into account content, communication, cognition, and culture. And for lessons within the curriculum, you should think of the 3 A's, which is analyze content for the language of learning, add to content language for learning, and apply to content language through learning. Okay? Well, when I saw this, when I started learning about bilingual education, I thought there's something that's not right here, in my opinion. Okay? I think there's too much language yet. There's too much focused on language. So I started to study, an option for an alternative for this curriculum planning and lesson planning, and I came up with I found about a couple of scholars from the United States called Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. And they wrote a book called Understanding by Design. And Understanding by Design is an idea for curriculum planning that is not for language specifically, it's for education as a whole. And I liked it because I think it's more holistic, it's broader, it's more fluid, and bilingual education, if we think of bilingual, dynamic bilingualism and all that, it's all that fluidity. And I thought we didn't have this fluidity in 4C3As. So I started to study that. It goes with some concepts called understanding. So the main concept is the understanding. So the understanding is the goal. You want to reach to an understanding. It doesn't, it's not just about acquiring knowledge. It's about acquiring knowledge and being able to apply that knowledge to your own context. Okay? For that you need the transfers. So you learn something and you need to transfer it to your reality and see, okay, I learned that, and therefore that changes my way of seeing the world around me. And once it changes the way you see the world around you, it will change it forever. Right? So it's all about that, reaching understandings through transfers. You learn something, okay, what does it tell you for your life? Then the concept of essential questions. Teachers need to be exceptional questioners. They need to ask the right questions to trigger students' curiosity. So the process of achieving understandings starts with the right questions, with asking the right questions to the students. Okay? Then we'll go a little bit through assessment, which is the collection of acceptable evidences of learning. So once you do all that, how do you know that they've achieved the understanding? You need to know how, you need to be certain about that. So what will be acceptable evidences produced by the students that will tell you that they've achieved the understandings? It changes the perspective. It's not prescriptive. It's not like, oh, I want you to know this. No, I want you to produce something so that you can show me what you know, and I can see if you've achieved the understanding or not. Okay? It changes the perspective. And the backward design model is the model for planning lessons, right? First you think of the goals, then you think of the assessment, and finally you're going to be talking about the tasks, the activities. And that's very difficult for teachers, because teachers tend to think activities. You think of something, oh, I'll do this and that, and no, don't do that first thing. Okay, where do you want to get? Here, okay. How do you know that they got there? Okay, acceptable evidence of learning. Okay, now what are the types of activities that will help them produce acceptable evidences of learning, so that you know that they've achieved the understanding? Okay. Well, this is a whole chapter. Okay, but I've been doing that with GLIL lessons and GLIL curricula, and it has been working well. It has been working very well, actually. So it's an option. If you want to know more about it, I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Well, assessment, just very quickly. The 3 dimensions of GLIL, I like that. You know, I met Phil Ball in 2016 in Colombia, and he had a talk about that, about the 3 dimensions of GLIL. Phil Ball is a British guy. He lives in Spain, and he's studying GLIL and bilingual education as well. And he says that there are 3 dimensions of GLIL that you must take into account. The conceptual, that means the concepts involved. The procedural, how do you work with that? And the linguistic one. And that you have to work as a teacher assessing that as operating a mixing table. That's a mixing table here. You know, the bass, treble, you know. For some tasks, you have to assess more of the conceptual, less of the procedural, and a little bit of the linguistic. For other tasks, you have more of the linguistic, a little bit of the procedural, and nothing of the conceptual, could be. Okay? So that's an idea. But overall, what you have to bear in mind when you're assessing GLIL and you're assessing bilingual education is the acronym Content and Language Integrated Learning. So if you're teaching GLIL and you assess just language, something's missing. GLIL and language are integrated, so you have to assess and you have to be sure that they are acquiring the knowledge of the content as well. Okay? Otherwise, it's not GLIL. You're just teaching language. So if you're teaching them about volcanoes or something like that, or the insects, you need to assess language related to insects, but also the content related to insects. You must check if they know that insects have 6 paws, 6 legs. You have to check that. If they have their body has 3 parts, you have to check that. Otherwise, it's not GLIL. All right? So you must assess what you teach. Okay. What have you learned? Nothing, right? In 2 weeks, 10% only will be there. Oh, man. What hard work. You wanna say something about what you've seen here, what you've heard here? You wanna make any questions? No? Well, you can stop me at any time. Final remarks, okay? So in bilingual education, language is the medium of instruction, okay? Bilingual education in the 21st century is not a privilege of bilingual schools only. You can have bilingual education programs even though you're not a bilingual school. Of course, if we're talking about bilingual schools, you have more, bilingual schools are more dedicated to the process itself, so the results will be better. The level of bilingualism that you reach at a bilingual school will be much higher. But you can have a bilingual education program even though you're not a bilingual school. Bilingual education can happen in many different formats and contexts, providing the theoretical concepts and principles are there. Right? So it has many faces. David Marsh says that CLIL has many faces, from long-term, high exposure to short-term, low exposure, from language showers, etc., etc., etc. Camps, you mentioned about exchange programs. Okay, you have many ways of seeing and having bilingual education. The acquisition process of a second or other language is much similar, if not the same, of that of the L1. So we must plan our lessons accordingly. This is also something interesting. How do you teach a kid the first language? You just talk. You talk. The kid listens to it, tries to make sense to things, and then when the kid feels confident enough, starts to produce something with some mistakes, right? The kid wants a cup of water. He will say, quer água? And what you do as a parent, you say, meu filho, você quer água? Tá aqui, água. What did you do? You just model the right language, but you praised him for the effort and for being able to communicate. And you're giving him the water, which was what he wanted, what the kid wanted, okay? And then only after, only when they go to school, they will see actually the patterns of the language, how it is organized and all that, but they will learn that subconsciously. They will learn that, they will acquire the language, as question says. This is the process for L1. How is it different for L2? Not very different. Not very different. So why do we do it the other way around? Why do we teach the verb to be, present simple? I am, you are, he, she, is. We are, you are, they are. I don't know why we do that. But I know that we know now that there are other ways of learning the language, and that the process of acquiring a language, a second, a third, a fourth, is much similar. It's a lot similar than the process for acquiring the first language. And when you have a first language, you can use the first language also as a support, as a standard, so you can make connections. So it's even easier in that sense. Okay? It is time to shift the perspective from teaching to learning, from teacher to student. We talk a lot about teaching, but we don't talk about learning. We have to look at our students. We have to be more empathic about our students. How do they learn? What do they feel? What is the best way for them? And not what do I want to teach? How do I teach that? How do I teach this? It's not important. If you want to teach and you think you're teaching a perfect class, but your students haven't learned, that's not a good class. So you have to put yourself in your students' shoes. We have to change this perspective and talk more about learning than teaching, really. Of course, to be a good teacher, you must know a lot, you must study a lot, you must know the techniques that you can use, but always taking into account what your student needs. Again, whatever you teach, you must assess. And bilingual education requires a change in teacher's mindset and role. Okay, so teacher has to be more of a mediator than anything else, must ask questions more than giving answers, and that's not just for bilingual education, I think that's for education as a whole, but anyway. And also you have a lot of knowledge with you, but you must reorganize that to teach bilingual education, because the concepts are in different places, in different roles there, and you must be able to reinvent yourself in that sense. To finish, Ofelia Garcia says, bilingual education is the only education possible in the 21st century. Okay. And Grant Wiggins said that the point of school is not to be good at school. Right? It's not just to pass the test. Thank you very much.
All right, guys. Now it's your time. Questions, thoughts, anything. We thought that after each talk, we have about 30 minutes for guys to talk with Carlos, ask more questions, give your opinion on what he said. And feel free to talk anything, to ask anything. You're here for that, okay?
If you want to ask me questions through WhatsApp or through email, you feel free to do so as well.
All right, no one? Okay then, this is Carlos. Okay, we have a question over there.
Don't get frustrated why you're not, we are not asking questions. We have the silent period. Internalizing what you just taught. And we are going to, you just gave us tools to go beyond, to go after it. So we're internalizing what you've said, and that's our happening here. Thank you very much. We enjoyed it a lot.
Carlos, can I ask you a question? Sorry. I have one.
Okay, sure.
What would be your first recommendation in terms of good books to start? Gaining knowledge on the matter, like a nightstand book. Okay, Marcus, this is my recommendation, the first one that you would recommend.
I think that Ofelia Garcia's Bilingual Education in the 21st Century is a must. You need to read that. If you want to go into CLIL, maybe you could see Joe Coyle's, I think, CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. For the planning of curriculum and lessons, I would go for Understanding by Design. So Understanding by Design by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. I think those three. In CLIL you have Uncovering CLIL is another book that is nice as well, from David Marsh. I think it's a good start. Those four. Everybody's hungry.
Sorry. Carlos, can I give a suggestion on CLIL?
Because we have Rita Ladeia here, and Rita has just put together a course, an online course on CLIL, and I think that would be also, I hope it is, I'm taking the course, so I hope this is also another possibility. Rita is there, so it's all.
Hello.
Rita was my teacher. She was my teacher at Singularidades. Yeah, very well pointed. I think it's very good. There's been a number of online courses that you should take a look at. Unfortunately, Singularidade doesn't have a long distance course, but not yet. Yeah.
It is being approved. We depend on a final decision on the MEC, but the graduate studies, the pós-graduação em educação bilíngue, will be also an online course.
Great, excellent.
Sorry, Carlos, can I repeat that?
Sure.
Yeah. We've been under this approval process so that our pós-graduação em educação bilíngue can be offered online. Singularidade has only presential courses. So the first one, it really takes a while so that we get all the documents that we need approved by the Ministry of Education. But we believe that still this year, maybe in August, we are going to open inscriptions for the first group of online pós-graduação em educação bilíngue. Okay?
Great. That's great news. Very good. Okay, guys, let's go for lunch.
Alright, guys. Not only that, but also with bilingual courses, we're going to launch a course here in Fortaleza. It's going to be a 120 hours course. Probably start in March. It's going to depend on how many people we want to do it. But we have two posters out here with more information. If you guys have any questions, just ask us. So for this morning, we plan just Carlos talk, give a lot of time. It's made us really happy to know that you guys are quiet, just because it's Saturday, yes. We'll be leaving for lunch then. It's 11:30. That gives us more time to start a little bit early and give more time for afternoon talks. We have two, and that's going to be awesome. Okay, we'll expect you back by 1:30. Start as soon as possible, as everyone is here. Okay, thank you very much. See you guys later. Bye bye.